Hello everybody and welcome into this OKPreps special here as we preview the 6A Division II State Championship game. It's come down to this, the Bixby Spartans getting set to take on the Stillwater Pioneers. 1 versus 2, both teams undefeated. It's the matchup that we've been waiting for in 6A2 as these two teams have been in the top 2 all season long. They met each other in the championship game a year ago and we get the rematch. Hello everybody and welcome into this preview special. I'm your host, Michael Knight, the director of OKPreps.com, and we're going to give you the most comprehensive, in-depth preview that you're going to be able to find anywhere else right here on OKPreps. We're going to break down the matchup. We're going to talk about all the storylines to follow within the game. We're going to break down some of the top players, who's going to be an X factor for either team, and we're also going to hear from both head coaches. We're going to hear from Bixby's head coach, Loren Montgomery, as well as Stillwater's head coach, Tucker Barnard. And we also have another special guest, Del City head coach Mike Dunn. He also sits down with me to discuss this matchup. Del City played both Stillwater during the regular season as well as Bixby in the playoffs. So if anybody knows about these two teams, it's Coach Dunn at Del City. So we have that conversation for you as well here in our 6A2 championship preview. And as always, you can't have a preview without making a pick. So we'll end this preview special with making our championship prediction for who's going to be raising the gold ball comes Friday night in Edmond. But first, before we dive into everything, we want to remind you to subscribe. If you haven't done so already, whether it's our YouTube channel for all of our video content, just go to youtube.com/OKPreps, hit subscribe. We're getting closer and closer to that 1,000 subscriber mark, so we want to encourage you to do that as we get closer and closer to the state championship games, because not only will you be able to see all of our championship preview videos, but once the championships begin and start happening, we'll have all of our championship recaps, interviews, highlights, everything to break down the championship games this weekend in Edmond. We will have it, and if you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel, and it doesn't cost you a cent, you'll be able to get all of our video content before we even post it to OKPreps.com. Speaking of that, also, if you're listening to this via podcast, we appreciate you listening in. You can also watch it as well, but for those watching, you can listen. If you prefer podcasts, we have you covered because all of our championship previews are also available in podcast form. Just search OKPreps on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, hit subscribe there, and while you're at it, leave us a review, rate us, let us know how we're doing, and you'll get all of our podcast content. And honestly, if you're wanting to get these previews as soon as possible, full disclosure, we're publishing the podcast form of these previews before we publish the videos to YouTube as well as to OKPreps.com. So if you're itching for those previews, the podcasts are coming out before anything else. So subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, just search OKPreps. And then as always, be sure to follow us on Twitter at OKPrepsTV and like us on Facebook. And you can always go to OKPreps.com for more championship coverage throughout the week this week as we count down the days and hours and minutes to kick off on Friday and Saturday for the state championships this week. It's 1 versus 2. Nothing better than that. It's the matchup that we've been waiting for in 6A2 and really in all high school football in Oklahoma. When you look at all the championship games that are going to be taking place this weekend, I'm the most fired up about this one. It has the makings to be an instant classic. I am concerned that we're all very excited about this game, and anytime you come into a week and you have a game that has so high expectations of great football, it's usually a dud. Sometimes it ends up being a dud. I don't think that's going to be the case, though. I think that this is going to be a great football game between two great teams. These two teams have been waiting for one another all season long. So I'm excited that the day is finally here, that we're going to get the rematch between the Spartans and the Pioneers. It's going to be a great football game on Friday night at the University of Central Oklahoma. And honestly, you might want to get there early, because there's a lot of hype around this matchup. There's a lot of expectations for this being the marquee championship game of the weekend. And so you might want to get there early. Wantland Stadium, they did do renovations at UCO, and their athletic facilities are beautiful. But Wantland Stadium, I believe it only holds about 10,000 people. And so you'll want to get there early to make sure you get your seat and make sure you're able to be in the stands and in the stadium for what should be an instant classic. But as always, if you miss it, you can follow us on Twitter for all the updates and check out the highlights afterwards as well on OKPreps.com. But let's dive in. Let's talk about this matchup, and we start with how each team got here, as both teams have been dominant all season long, and it shows with week after week. It didn't matter who was lined up against either team. They just absolutely took that team out to the woodshed and would win blowout after blowout. Let's take a look at the Bixby Spartans, who come in number 1 and 12-0 on the season. How did they get to this year's state championship game? Well, first it started down in Texas, as the Bixby Spartans were among 5 teams in the Tulsa area that went down to Texas to open up their season. They would take on Mansfield Timberview in the season opener, and they would walk away with a 77-47 victory over Timberview in that one. Brennan Presley went wild in his season debut. He caught 6 touchdown passes in their season opener, putting up 77 points in the victory over Timberview. The following week, they would take on Jinx, a traditional rival for the Spartans. They would go to Jinx to face the Trojans, and they would walk away with a 57-7 victory. And it was at that point this year that you started taking Bixby seriously as perhaps the best team in Oklahoma, regardless of class. That's when all these questions started popping up. That's when everybody started looking at this potential rematch as being one of the games of the year, and highly anticipated rematches as far as championships from last year go. Bixby going on the road and blowing out Jinx the way they did definitely got everybody's attention all the way back in early September. They would then take the week off and follow that up by going on the road to wrap up non-district play against Putnam City. No contest there, 72-0. They would open up district play against a Sapulpa team that had some high expectations coming in, and yet Bixby was able to take them to the woodshed as well, winning it 54-10. And then came the showdown with Booker T. Washington the first Friday in October. Bixby would go to North Tulsa to take on the Hornets, and they would pitch a shutout, winning that one 31-0. A dominant performance by Bixby against a team in Booker T that's been their main rival during the regular season since the split in 6A. Since 6A2 came into existence, Booker T has been really the team, the thorn in Bixby's side the last few years, but they absolutely handled business back on October 4th. They would follow that up with blowout wins over Ponca City, Bartlesville, Sand Springs, and Shawnee. And then came a Week 10 showdown against Muskogee. The district championship was on the line. Muskogee wanted to prove that they belonged with the elite, like a Bixby, like a Stillwater in 6A2. The Spartans would dominate that game as well, winning by 42-63-21 was the final there, as they absolutely dominated the Roughers once again. Bixby showing why they are the top-ranked team. And so they would go into the playoffs undefeated. And as successful as Bixby has been since the split in Class 6A, they've never had an undefeated regular season. They were able to accomplish that this year. They opened up the playoffs against a familiar foe in Midwest City. Midwest City, they had met them in the semifinals the last 2 years. They played in the first round this season. The Spartans would win that one 42-10. And then in the semifinals, they met Del City, and they were able to get that victory as well, 47-19, as they were able to knock off the Eagles and punch their ticket to the state championship game. It's their 13th state championship game in school history, the 6th consecutive state championship game for Bixby. And really, this has been a class that's been owned by the Spartans since Class 6A split into 2 divisions. That was 6 years ago. And since then, no team has been able to stop Bixby from making it to the championship game, as they are now into their 6th consecutive state title game. They're 4-1 during that span. They won the championship last year, obviously beating Stillwater in the title game. The year before that was the only time that they fell short of a gold ball. They lost to Booker T. Washington, hence the 4-1 record during that time. They're 4-8 overall in championship games. And I mentioned earlier how they finished off a perfect regular season. Bixby has never had an undefeated season in school history, despite how dominant they've been since the split in 6A. And really, when you break down those seasons, more times than not, it's the Jinx Trojans or Booker T. Washington, Sand Springs here and there, who have something to say about Bixby having a perfect season. But they do have a perfect season, looking for their first one in school history to go along with what would be their 5th championship in the last 6 years, looking to continue that dynasty there in South Tulsa, in the South Tulsa area in Bixby, Oklahoma. The Stillwater Pioneers come into the championship game ranked number 2 and 12-0 on the season as well, and they've been dominant all year. And you can make the argument they've been more dominant than Bixby has, although the schedule has not been as difficult for the Pioneers. They've blown out every single team that has stepped to them. They opened up the season against Edmond Memorial. That was a 35-point win. They would host Norman North. That was another blowout win by 41. They would go on the road to take on Southmore, shut out the SaberCats 66-0. And then they would open up district play against a Deer Creek team that had playoff expectations coming into the year, and they would walk away with a 49-10 victory. They followed that up with a road test against Midwest City. They passed with flying colors, winning 49-14. They would host Choctaw on October 11th and win that one by 60, 74-14 was the final in that one. Then they would host Lawton in fall break, and they would win 62-14. And they would put up 60 in the next couple of weeks in blowout victories over PC West and Putnam City. And then came the Week 10 showdown. And really, you think back to what Bixby did in Week 10. They had a district championship showdown with Muskogee. The same was true for Stillwater, as they had a Week 10 district title showdown with Del City. They were able to get the win 48-23. Then came the playoffs. They would open up against Sapulpa, and they would get a 71-point victory over the Chieftains. 70-76 was the final there. And then they would have a rematch with Choctaw, a team that they had beaten by 60 points in the regular season. They would beat Choctaw by 50 this time, punching their ticket to the state championship game, their 2nd consecutive state championship game, and the 6th time in school history that they'll be playing for a gold ball. They're 1-4 all time in championship contests, and it's been a long time since the Pioneers have won a gold ball. They're looking to replace the one that they replace the silver one that they brought home last year with a gold one this year. Let's take a look at 3 storylines to follow, whether they're matchups or other things within the game itself. And the number one storyline for me, without a doubt in my mind, is Gunnar Gundy, the Stillwater quarterback, senior QB, who's a 3-year starter. He also saw plenty of time as a freshman as well. One of the best, arguably the best quarterback in Oklahoma right now. And how will he do against this Bixby secondary and these Bixby defensive backs? That's going to be, without a doubt, the matchup of the game for me. Gundy has been flawless throughout the season. He's been nearly perfect. In fact, in some games, he nearly was perfect. He had a couple of games where he only threw 1 incompletion. And we're not talking about, games where he only threw 7 passes. No, he had a game where he was 19 of 20. He had another game where he was 17 of 18. I mean, this guy was nearly perfect in several games throughout the season. So how will he do when he goes up against a Brennan Presley on one side of the field, an OSU commit? Or how will he do if he tries to throw it to the other side of the field where Jordan Reagan, another OSU commit at corner, is? Bixby defensively has shown that they're able to slow down the passing attack. They have speed everywhere on that defense. So this is without a doubt going to be the biggest test for Gunnar Gundy. And we're going to talk about the success that he, or lack thereof, that he had in the passing game last year against Bixby. If he's not able to have success like he's had all season long this year, it could be a long night for the Pioneers. Without a doubt in my mind, the matchup to watch is Gundy versus the Bixby secondary. If Gundy's able to have success, if Gunner's able to find open men, and he has weapons. He has weapons at the receiver position. He has, Quantrell Walker out of the backfield at running back. If he's able to slice up the Bixby defense, we could be seeing the end of a dynasty, or the end of this dynasty run for Bixby, and Stillwater gets a 6A2 championship. However, it could very well also go the other way, and it could end up being a long night for the Pioneers, as Bixby has arguably the best secondary that Stillwater is going to see this season. Anytime you have a championship game like this, where the two teams, offensively, defensively, they seem incredibly evenly matched. And especially when you look at the offenses, and you saw some of the scores that they've been able to put up this season, scoring in the 60s regularly, scoring, north of 50 points a game regularly. Whenever you have a matchup like that, the one thing that I always think about, and it's going to be a big storyline in this one, is the turnover battle. If a team is able to get an extra possession here, an extra possession there, that means that their dangerous offense gets to come back onto the field. And so anytime you have a matchup that have two absolutely explosive offenses, and honestly, if you're a defensive coordinator, and I make the joke with Bixby head coach Loren Montgomery coming up here in just moments, so we'll be chatting with him. But I made the joke, if I'm a defensive coordinator in this matchup, I'm losing sleep. They've had 2 weeks to prepare for this game, and realistically, they've had all season to at least have this in the back of their mind, how to slow down the other team's offense. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how you slow down either team. But one thing is certain. If one of these teams makes a mistake, if one of these teams has a turnover, whether it's an interception, a fumble, whatever it may be, and gives the other offense an extra opportunity and another crack at being on the field and having a chance to put up points, that could go a long way to deciding who's going to be raising the goal ball on Friday night. And then finally, the final storyline, when you take a look at last year's championship game, and I don't think we're necessarily going to have something like this happen, but what was the biggest key to Bixby beating Stillwater last year? It was Cade Cavender. If you remember, Bixby's wide receiver moved to the running back position, and he ended up running for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in that championship game against the Pioneers. So who could be this year's Cade Cavender? We're going to talk about some of the potential X factors coming up later on in the preview, but that was without a doubt a huge difference maker for Bixby last year, something that Stillwater necessarily wasn't expecting going into the game. And so for either team, they've had an off week to prepare for this title game. You know that there's going to be some trickery. You know that there's going to be some cards that they've been holding back. And look, they've looked so impressive all season long, and as impressive as they've looked, I can guarantee you that they haven't shown all their cards yet. They've been holding back for a certain point, and it's going to come on Friday night where you throw that card down and you try to make something special happen. So who's going to be this year's Cade Cavender? Is it on Stillwater? Is it on Bixby? We're going to find out on Friday night. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think that we're necessarily going to see a potential, replay of that where a guy comes out of nowhere and has a performance like that, because there's too many stars in this game on Stillwater's side, on Bixby's side. There's too many guys that can absolutely make plays where you don't necessarily need a guy to come from out of nowhere to run for over 200 yards. But I can guarantee you, if either team could get that from one of their players, they would absolutely take it. All right, enough talk for now. Before we get into some players to watch, we mentioned the X factors as well. We want to hear from both head coaches in the matchup, and we're going to go from one interview to the next, and then we'll throw it back here to the studio to wrap it up with players to watch, X factors, and of course our championship prediction. But we're going to start with Bixby head coach Loren Montgomery. From there, we're going to go to Stillwater with their head coach Tucker Barnard, and then from there we're going to go to Del City to hear from their head coach Mike Dunn to get a little different perspective and more of a breakdown on the matchup between these two teams. He saw Bixby in the semifinals. He saw Stillwater in Week 10. So he's very familiar with both teams in Friday night's game. We'll hear from him as well. But up first, the defending champion Bixby Spartans looking for their first perfect season in school history. Let's throw it to the campus there at Bixby High School for our conversation with Bixby head coach Loren Montgomery. And we kick off our coaches' conversations here for the 6A2 state championship preview right here at Bixby High School with Bixby head coach Loren Montgomery. Coach, little different coming into the championship game this year simply because you got that goose egg in the loss column. You guys have accomplished a lot here at Bixby in the last 5-6 years, but you've never had a perfect season, and you're knocking on the doorstep of that this year.
Yeah, no, we've had a good year. I've been real proud of our guys. We've had some good wins, and most importantly, feel like our guys have continued to get better and practice well throughout the course of the year.
Now, we mentioned how much success that you guys have had. 6 consecutive trips to the state championship game. Full disclosure, we're recording this the day before Thanksgiving, so you've had 6 straight Thanksgivings now where you've had the opportunity and ability to practice on Thanksgiving, which I know is huge in Oklahoma. Just talk about this program, where it began and where it's gotten to now, where you get to Thanksgiving and it's become just kind of obvious that Bixby's going to be practicing.
Yeah, no, we've been real fortunate here at Bixby. When we came here in 2010, we were the smallest school in 6A, and throughout the course of this 10 years, now we're the largest school in 6A2, and we'll see where we fall here coming up December 15th or whenever they're going to release the most recent ADM. But, yeah, to see our program grow, our community grow, and support of our program, it's been really nice. And to get to practice 6 straight years on Thanksgiving, it's a really big deal that we're thankful for, that we don't take for granted.
What has been the biggest key to this run where you've done it in a lot of different ways, and you and I have had a lot of these sit-down conversations, and whether it was early on in the run where Nick Roller was carrying it 45 times in a game. You've done it in a lot of different ways. Mason Williams had a great year last season, throwing the football. Tanner Griffin, some big names that you haven't just been a run-oriented team. You haven't been just a pass-oriented team. You've done it in a lot of different ways. What's been the biggest key to the success over this run?
Well, I think we've got a great staff in that regard. You talked about doing it different ways, and so we've got a group of guys that have been with us for a long time. Coach Rodney Flowers, our defensive coordinator, and Coach Tyler Schneider, our offensive coordinator. Those guys have been with us for every state championship and do a great job. Some years, we have to be a zone team or have the ability to be a zone team. Some years, like the last couple, we've been able to play a little bit of man and be more aggressive on defense, and then vice versa on offense. We've done a good job when we've had Nick Roller types and big physical offensive lines to be able to pound the rock. And then some years we're a little bit more throw oriented. And I think I heard last year at a clinic, Matt Campbell up at Iowa State talked about players, formations, plays, and I think that's a pretty good analogy. That's one of the things that our coordinators do right from the very start. They look at who we have coming in, what guys we have returning, and kind of build their offenses and defenses around that.
Now, heading into this year, you're coming in as defending champs. Obviously, the expectation has become, make it to the championship game practicing on Thanksgiving. But this year you're coming in as defending champ, number one team, so much talent coming back off of last year's squad. And that bullseye is directly on your chest from week one all the way to now. And not only has your team responded to that, you responded in a big way by blowing basically everybody on your schedule out. Just talk about back in August, did you expect your team to be, obviously, some of those games, turnovers, things like that had a lot to do with it. But at the same time, from week one all the way to now, Coach, your team has been dominant every single week. Did you expect that back in August?
No, I think I'd be lying if I said that. The 1 or 2 years in the 20 years that I've been coaching, and I expected a team to be dominant coming into the season, it ended up they didn't reach their capacity, and so this team we had a lot of questions. Obviously, we graduated several offensive linemen, our entire defensive line, 2 really good safeties. Cade Cavender was instrumental for us down the stretch, offensively and defensively. And so we had a lot of question marks coming into this year. And so I've been pleased at the way that our group has responded and practiced, and our senior leaders, it's our largest senior class. I've been real pleased at the way that they've tried to lead this team and make sure that we remain focused and practice well every day in practice.
One of those seniors is Brennan Presley, and you and I have had a lot of conversation. I've been talking about the kid since he was a sophomore. I was like, this kid has the chance to be special, and he has lived up to that up to this point. This year, it seems like he hit that extra gear, and he went from being one of the better players in the state to potentially the best player in the state. He's definitely on a short list for Player of the Year in Oklahoma. What has changed in him this year? Because we knew the athletic ability was there, but what was that next gear that he hit this season that separated him from some of the other best players in Oklahoma?
I don't know. That's a good question. We've always thought that Brennan was a really special player and has been really good for us. He does so much. He returns kicks, punts, plays corner. We line him up at wide receiver, inside, outside, tailback. It does a lot of things for us. But I think it's just been a progression within the program. We get the kids when they're really young, and Brennan we got when he was a freshman, and he's bought into our process as far as lifting weights, as far as being very diligent in the classroom, being a great practice player, and simply that process in and of itself, we believe allows players to develop. And then you take a kid like Brennan that has so much God-given athletic ability and is so gifted with his work ethic. It's just allowed him to continually progress. And so I think it's just been a steady progression of Brennan Presley and his athletic ability, his work ethic, and the numbers and the output that you've seen from him.
All right, we got to talk about Stillwater. We got to preview this championship game. That's why we're here. You guys have been 1-2 all year. They have been right there with you as far as dominance goes. Every single week, they're blowing teams out. Offensively, they look extremely special. You're probably gonna give me a coach speak answer, but throughout the season, you guys were 1-2 all year. Did you ever find yourself, peeking to see what Stillwater was doing, knowing that this, really from September, it looked like this was kind of what was inevitable, you two facing off again in a championship game?
Well, I think we always look at the progression of all the different teams in the state, whether it's Muskogee, whether it's Lawton, whether it's Stillwater, and so obviously we've seen them, throughout the year put up ungodly numbers and do really, really special things. And it wasn't until this week when we exchanged tape and really got to take a look at their film that it became clear on why they are putting up those numbers. They're so very good at what they've done. Their quarterback, their running back, their wide receiver, their defense, all those guys that have been in that program, been in that system, have continued to get better and embrace it, and they're just playing such good football right now. It's clear to me, why they've been able to put those numbers up.
You mentioned their quarterback, Gunnar Gundy. Similar to what Brennan has been able to do this year, I think the same can be said about Gunnar. He's always had that ability, but he's hit that next gear, whatever that next gear is. I think he's hit it and become one of the best players, without a doubt, one of the best quarterbacks in the state. How do you now try to contain that, on a Friday night in Edmond? How do you try to slow down Gunnar Gundy in this Stillwater passing attack?
With a team like Stillwater and similar to last year, that they're going to make some really good plays because they have great players, they have a great scheme, they have good coaches, all of that. And then I think you just kind of have to hope and prepare for the fact that your players are going to make some plays too. And I think in a game like this, it often comes down to which team plays the best, as it should in a championship game, which team makes the fewest mistakes, which team protects the football the best, and those sort of things. But as far as, slowing down, an offense that good, I don't think you shut them down completely by any means.
And that leads me to my next thought, because you guys are averaging 55 plus a game. They're averaging 55 plus a game. The defensive coordinators for both teams have to be, basically up 24/7, just pulling their hair out, trying to figure out what do we do to slow and the same goes for Stillwater. What do we do to slow down Bixby? Defensively, both teams on both sides of the ball are exceptionally well on defense as well, and it seems like, what do you expect from this title game? Do you expect a shootout? What kind of game should we be expecting? Because I have no idea.
I don't know. That's hard to predict. Going into last year's game, I don't think we predicted that Cade Cavender would have over 200 yards rushing, and in fact, I know we wouldn't have. And so you just don't know. A lot of times the games take different complexions, but I know Stillwater plays exceptional defense, and we've played them the last couple of years in the playoffs, and we've noticed that progression of them getting better. And so, it's going to be a dandy of a game, and hopefully both defenses play really well.
Leads me to my last thought. I'm sure you have a couple of things up your sleeve. I'm sure Tucker has a couple of things up his sleeve as well. As you prepare for this championship game, as you look at the matchup, what's going to be the biggest key in your mind for Bixby to continue this dynasty? And this has been a dynasty, 4 out of the last 5, looking for 5 out of the last 6. How do you continue this with another gold ball?
Well, I think the winner of this game will be the team, as I mentioned before, that plays the best. When you match the teams up and you look at them, there are a lot of similarities at a lot of positions. A lot of similarities in numbers, and so it'll be the team that goes out and plays the best, that relaxes, that protects the football, and that makes plays when they're in those situations. And generally in these games, your best players have a tendency to shine and make plays, and it should be an interesting game that I know a lot of folks are looking forward to.
They've been looking forward to it since September. So have I. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens on Friday night. Congrats on getting here, Coach, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
He's Loren Montgomery. I'm Michael Knight. Now I'm gonna throw it to myself in Stillwater, where I'm sitting down with Stillwater head coach Tucker Barnard as we continue this 6A2 championship preview. And we continue our 6A2 preview here at Stillwater High School with their head coach, Tucker Barnard. Coach, congratulations first off on making it back to the championship game. Just talk about this season, the journey to get here, and obviously after making it to the title game last year, it's a little unfinished business coming into 2019. Talk about this season and the road that you guys have been on that has ended right here in the title game in a rematch against Bixby.
Yeah. Last year was a tough way to go out. Our kids felt like they had really put themselves in a great position, and they did. But to come up short in the title game is a tough pill to swallow. And I think this year our kids just they've been hungry from the start. It gave them a new sense of vision and things that were possible, and we've had a great year. It's been a really fast start, from Ed Memorial all the way through for 12 weeks, and just couldn't be prouder of the kids.
Did you? At what point coming into this season did you know that you had? Obviously the skill guys were coming back. You had to replace, some pieces on the offensive line, defense. had some pieces that needed to step up. At what point did you know that you had another team that was capable of making another championship run?
I think we knew from the beginning that there was an opportunity for that. I mean, even the weekend of the state championship loss last year. I mean, I think we knew that there was a chance. And we just had so many skill players and coming back. We did have to replace 4 senior offensive linemen. 3 of those guys were playing college football today. So that was a big hole that we had to fill. But we just felt like we had the right pieces. In the locker room to be able to do it. I think all the way throughout the course of the year. I mean, we've won a lot of pretty lopsided games, and you just kind of kept wondering, when that real adversity, was going to hit. But we felt like there were, some key games with Midwest City and Dell City, and that were, tested us a little bit. And so back to the question, I think we knew all along we had a chance. We just knew that we had to do our work and put our best effort out there.
Obviously, when you get a guy like Gunnar Gundy coming back, 3rd year as a full-time starter, he saw plenty of time as a freshman as well. That has to make you feel good and confident as a coach. But I want to know at what point, whether it was in the off season, early on in training camp, at what point did he take that next step? Because he went from being a really good quarterback that we saw last year to possibly the best quarterback in the state of Oklahoma this year. What was that moment like where he realized I might be the best one in Oklahoma, and where did that jump come from?
I don't know if for me, if there was a clear-cut moment when that happened. I mean, it was I felt like it's a progression that he's been on. I mean, I do think that one thing that really maybe spiked his productivity and ability is just all the work that he's done with his mechanics, his throwing mechanics, and he's really shortened his motion up a lot and was able to get the ball out so quick. I mean, but he's always, I mean, golly, going all the way back to his junior high days, he's always been such an accurate passer, and he's always made such good decisions with the football that he's going to give you a chance to win each and every week. But shorten up his throw. Obviously as his size and strength and things improved. I mean, when he was a freshman playing for us, and he was 5'10", 130 pounds. And he's a lot different looking kid than that now.
And we mentioned Gunnar coming back, plenty of experience as well at the running back position with Quantrell Walker, who burst onto the scene as a freshman and really hasn't taken a step back at all. He's just continued to get better and better over the last couple of years. Yeah. It has to make, as far as, the offensive side of the ball, replacing 4 offensive linemen, it had to be kind of easier in the sense of we have, 2 of the absolute best in the state that are going to be in the backfield. They'll know what to do as those guys come along.
Yeah, if there's ever a time when you feel like you have you can feel comfortable replacing a bunch of offensive linemen, it is a situation where you've got, your running back is back. I mean, Quantrell scored 60 touchdowns, rushed for over 5,000 yards, and Gunner's thrown for over 3,000 this year. I mean, around 9 or so in his career, and so there is just a feeling of comfort, I guess, in the fact that you know what those guys can do, and we felt like with the offensive line as we're trying to work to replace those guys, that there were just enough pieces around that we felt like we could take the positives, the negatives, the strengths and weaknesses of these new offensive linemen and still put it all together in a way that it could work for us.
How good is your defense? Because a lot of the press and pub and all that, and I mean rightfully so, has been on the offensive side of the ball, talking about how dominant you guys have been, dominant Gunnar, dominant Quantrell, but your defense is one of the best as well. I think you're averaging like 10 points allowed this season. I mean, what is it about your defense that allows you to be just as dominant as the offense?
Yeah, I think what we do is really unique, and I've heard a couple of coaches that we play calling our defense exotic, and which kind of makes us smile, makes us laugh a little bit. You know, I don't know if it's exotic necessarily, but it certainly is unique, and the way that we disguise our pressures and our coverages, and the way that we make it look like so much more maybe than it is at times. But then, there's other times when it is everything that it appears to be, So I think that's really difficult for a high school quarterback to sort out. Sometimes offensive linemen, difficult for them to sort out. But we've got some really strong players over there too. I mean, our offensive players have gotten, most of the attention with Gunner and Anthony Bland, Quantrell Walker, and, Stephen Brown, those guys. But defensively, I mean, our defensive backfield is probably just as talented on that side of the ball as what our offensive skill guys are on the other side. And Kobe Hawley and Garrick Martin are going to play college football somewhere. Tevin Williams, just a junior, but he's going to be a Division I football player. Cedric Frazier is a senior, going to graduate, but he's going to play college football somewhere. Sean Preston at linebacker, Trevor Benham at defensive line, Luke McIndoe at defensive line. I mean, there's just there's a bunch of guys over there that they make a lot of plays. They're really talented in what they do, and I'm amazed, honestly, at the the amount of things that we're able to do in terms of just our calls, and give those guys a lot of credit for learning and being able to execute those things.
You mentioned the word adversity, and you can make the argument that you guys have faced adversity very few times this season with how these games have ended up, and that's obviously a very good thing, but at the same time, as you're going into a championship game where it's not going to be over at halftime, it's not going to be over after the third quarter, you're going to have to play all 48 minutes to beat this Bixby team. How do you prepare your kids for adversity that they haven't faced this year, knowing that they're going to see it when you take the field against Bixby?
Yeah, we've kind of had to redefine adversity at times this year. I mean, sometimes not scoring every time out there has been adversity, quote unquote, for us, and giving up a couple of first downs has been adversity. I mean, we just what we do is we try to we work really hard to make sure that we're preparing each week the same, and we really I think you could go through and ask our kids, and I think to a man they would tell you that the type of preparation that we put in it, whether the team that we're playing is 1-5 or whether they're undefeated, like we are. I mean, we've put in the same kind of work each and every week, and the adversity, that it comes in a lot of different forms. I mean, it comes when you miss a tackle, it comes when you drop a ball, it comes when you go to intercept a football and drop it. I mean, there's all kinds of adversity, and we've just tried to use each of those instances, kind of maybe the same way that you would do when you have a struggling team and you have to celebrate small successes, as you're trying to learn how to win. You know what I mean? Like we've been through that before, and that maybe a first down is a success that you have to celebrate. We're really pointing out some small adversities, and trying to learn from that and trying to prepare ourselves mentally. But I know Bixby's in the same situation. They've won all their games by a big margin too. Right. So I think we're both kind of fighting the same battle there.
It's 1 versus 2, 12-0 versus 12-0. You mentioned they've been just as dominant as Stillwater has this year. Coming into this season, let's have a little fun here as the championship game is getting closer and closer. After playing them last year, falling short, having to come back up 4-12 with a silver ball instead of a gold one, how special is it to not only make it back to the championship game, but get another shot at Bixby? Yeah,
it really is special. I mean, I'm not going to exaggerate this deal and tell you that we've been, breaking out our huddles on Spartans, all year, or in the weight room, or anything like that. I mean, we've gone about our business week by week like we need to. But I think what's really neat for me, and I brought this up to my team last week, is after we win the semifinal game, I just drew a comparison to last year that security had to run us off the field basically at Owasso after we beat Booker T. I mean, because we didn't want to leave. We were celebrating that victory. We were so excited to be in the game and in the state championship game the following week or 2 weeks later, and this year after winning the state semifinals, I mean, our guys really, I mean, it was like every other game. I mean, we went to the locker room, we packed our stuff up, and we went home. And I think for me, the thing that really made me proud about that, I think just our mindset of the kids. I mean, it is, you said, unfinished business at the beginning of this talk here, and I think that's how our kids feel. So being back in the game, yeah, it's exciting, but I'd be lying to you if I told you that we've celebrated that a whole lot. I mean, we will at some point, but we're working really hard to finish this thing this year.
You get the Spartans, looking at their offense, just as dynamic. That quarterback has taken similar steps that Gunner has as far as taking his game to the next level this year. Insanely accurate with the football. They have weapons at receiver. The younger Presley kid, Braylon, fantastic runner. You have not one but two Presleys to worry about now. Mm-hmm. How do you defensively try to contain what they do? And does it help at all considering your defense has to see your offense every day at practice? Because, when you compare the two teams, they might, throw the ball, a little bit more, but at the same time, they're just as dynamic. Your defense has seen Stillwater's offense every single day at practice. Does that help at all going into a game like this?
I think it helps a little bit. I mean, we compete against each other probably a lot more early in the season than what we have here late in the season. But I think it does help us. But I think that the biggest thing is just in terms of our preparation. I mean, our kids work really hard at studying their opponents and trying to find things that they can key on. I think our coaches do a great job of putting them in a position to be really successful. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, the two offenses we probably mirror each other quite a bit. I mean, Gunner's numbers are almost identical to Mason's at Bixby. I mean, I think Mason's got one more touchdown maybe, or in the yards and attempts and all that is all really similar. We both have pretty dynamic running backs. Defensively, I think the interesting point is we probably couldn't be more different. We're getting a lot of the same results. I think we're both giving up about 10 points a game, but the way that we go about it is a lot different, and I think that'll be a stark contrast to the people that are watching that ball game, and should be a fun matchup.
As you're preparing for this, do you have a feeling on how the game might be played out as far as low scoring, high scoring, shootout? I mean, considering the offenses and the firepower, at least on paper, when I look at it, I kind of expect a bit of a shootout. Several touchdowns both sides. Now, shootout might mean in the 30s, but back and forth scoring between the two teams. How do you see this game playing out?
I really think it'll probably be a lower scoring game than what either of us have experienced this year. I mean, I know that both offenses are certainly capable of putting up a lot of points. But I just think what we've seen out of Bixby's defense and what we have been able to do defensively, I think we're both going to make it. I think we're going to make it hard on each other, and I mean, I think probably 34, 35 points is probably a winning type score. Again, something could happen, that busts that open. Obviously, again, like I say, we both have the ability to score a bunch. I just don't really see it playing out like a big shootout, 49-48 type ball game. I just don't think it'll be that.
You saw them last year for the championship. Have you played we mentioned unfinished business. Revenge certainly is a word that you can throw around, getting another shot at this team for the gold ball. As a coach, have you played that card with your guys as you prepare for this week?
I really haven't, and that's that's just not really how we operate, and we haven't operated that way here for, at least in the time that I've been here. We try to worry a whole lot more about us, and our execution and our preparation and things like that, and try to leave the revenge type talk and the rivalry talk, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just not something that we really do a whole lot of around here. I mean, we try to go day by day, week by week, play by play, and perform at a really high level.
You've had, at this point, full disclosure, we're recording this the day after Thanksgiving, so about a week to go before the championship game. You've had a week to dissect film. You'll have another week to continue to prepare your guys for this championship game. When you look at this matchup, when you look at both teams, what do you see as the biggest edge for your ball club going into the title game?
Oh gosh, I think just our seniors probably is our biggest edge. I mean, I think we've got great leadership out of our senior football players, and I think that's probably cliche a lot of times, but when I'm still relatively young in this business, but I've been doing this for 22, 23 years now, and you see all these different classes that cycle through, and the personalities that they have and all that kind of thing, and this has been one of my most favorite senior classes, and just the way they go about business. I mean, they love to practice, they love to work, they love each other, and so I think probably just that that group mentality, that they have, that brotherhood. I think that's probably the biggest edge that we have, and we've got a lot of talent to go along with that.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, congratulations on making it back to the championship game. I know that this is the matchup that everybody, including myself, have wanted since about August. So I'm glad that we get to see it. Two great teams, two great coaches, great players on both sides. Looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Thank you for sitting down with me today.
Yeah, man, thanks for your time.
Stillwater head coach Tucker Barnard. Coming up next, we're going to talk with a guy who has seen both Bixby and Stillwater this year. Del City head coach Mike Dunn sits down with me to break down Bixby, to break down Stillwater, and what we can expect in the 6A2 state championship game. And we continue our 6A2 championship preview here at Del City High School with a guy who knows a lot about both teams in the 6A2 championship matchup, Bixby and Stillwater. Del City head coach Mike Dunn. Coach, first off, obviously, you'd rather be playing than talking about it, but these are two teams that, from the start of the season seemed like to be on a crash course for this championship game. Your initial reaction to now that, the championship's here, we're getting it 1 versus 2, both undefeated coming in.
Yeah, well, as just a fan of high school football, I'm really excited about this one. I think it's probably the most evenly matched game. I know the 5A, 4A, all that from lower. It's not solidified yet, but I don't see there being a better game than these two teams against each other. Both of them are high-powered on offense. Both of them have really good defensive teams. They're both big, strong, physical, fast. They're two teams that there's really not a hole. There's not a chink in the armor. Every time that we looked and tried to find something that we thought that's where you go attack them, we couldn't find that. So I think it's going to be a big-time high school football game.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason why, that's you mentioned it, this might be the most highly anticipated championship game, and I think a lot of that has to do with them coming in undefeated, having so much talent coming back off of last year. They met in the title game a year ago, and I mean, people have just kind of been waiting since about September because, like you said, neither team really has that many weaknesses, if any. Coming into this season, you mentioned knowing the landscape of football in Oklahoma in 6A2. When you saw those two teams, did you expect them to be as dominant as we ended up seeing this year?
Yeah, we thought that Stillwater was going to have to replace a lot on the offensive line, and we thought that might be a place where we would have a matchup with our defensive line, and it didn't turn out that way. That they really good up front. They're younger this year, but they're just as good as they were last year. I think they're even better in the pass game this year than they were last year. Had some kids step up that were kind of unknowns last year that have done a really good job. Gunnar Gundy is a different beast this year than he was last year. I mean, he's unreal. It doesn't matter. We played tight coverage, and we tried to switch up the look. We tried to do all kinds of different things to mess with him, and it didn't work. He was on the money, and I could see him doing the same thing in the championship game. And then Bixby, we've been watching from afar of what they were doing, and we were telling our kids all year long, you got to prepare like you're going to play 13 games. These teams that we're playing against right now really don't matter. You need to really work on yourself. And if you want to beat a Bixby or Stillwater, and we got them late to where we were playing our best football, but there was things that we just couldn't overcome in those games, and they did a really good job against us. So
You mentioned Gunnar, and we talked with Coach Montgomery over at Bixby and Coach Barnard over at Stillwater, and one of the things that I continue to bring up was him taking that next step. He's been a good quarterback. We knew he was one of the better ones in Oklahoma, but this year it seems like he hit that extra gear. What was the biggest difference for you, watching it on film, watching it on the sideline in person? What was that jump that he made from last year to this year, becoming arguably the best quarterback in the state?
Yeah, I think physically he really worked on some of his tools. His attributes, even his size and his strength, all of that was better this year. The way he got the ball out, his mechanics were a lot better as well. So you can tell he put the work in the offseason to fix some of those things that might not have been as good last year. Against us last year, I think he was 4 of 18. I think he had about 50 yards passing. And this year he went off. He had a lot more than that in the first half alone, So I think that he's really worked at it. I mean, obviously he's got a guy in his corner that probably has taught him a few things.
Right, yeah.
Along with the coaches there at Stillwater. But, I think he did what you want all your kids to do. I think he went out and worked. You saw him at camps all summer. He did the Elite 11 stuff. Last year there was a lot of question mark whether he was a Division I quarterback, and this year I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, obviously he's got the D1 offers now, but I don't think there's any doubt that he can go play at a high level wherever he ends up next year. I've watched that kid since he was really little. My dad and his grandpa were best friends, and so I've got to watch Gunnar since he was a little guy and watched him grow up. And you'd have never saw it when he was a little kid.
Right.
He was a little guy, wasn't very big, and just the work that he's put in to put himself in that conversation as the best quarterback in the state, I think, says a lot about him and those coaches at Stillwater.
Now he goes up against arguably the best defense that he's going to see all year, specifically 2 corners in Brennan Presley and Jordan Reagan, who are both committed to Oklahoma State. Presley, who is in that conversation for overall best player in Oklahoma right now. Reagan, another guy who you need to watch out on the other side. If you're Stillwater, how do you attack the secondary? Because it's, like I said, arguably the best secondary that you've seen this year with those 2 guys at corner. They don't get beat very often. How do you attack them if you're Gundy?
Well, I don't think you go into a game with a plan of trying to beat those guys all night long, because you're not going to do it. I mean, those 2 guys are 2 of the best DBs that I've seen as a high school coach the last 15 years. We tried to attack the middle a little bit better. We didn't do as well of a job. We didn't see it as well. We tried to attack the middle of the defense. And we had some success out on the edge a little bit. They'll do some things out wide to allow you to throw the ball in front, but those guys just rally up and tackle so well. Sometimes that's even hard. And they'll give a little bit of zone here and there. It'll be interesting to see how they play Stillwater, because that's one of the things that we saw on film with those guys is, it didn't matter what you gave them, zone, man, really didn't matter. They attacked, and I think that those receivers and Gunnar have worked together so well the last couple of years. I think they've put a lot of time in, and a lot of that stuff they can switch on the fly. They can read defenses, and they know route running, what they need to run and what they need to convert to, and so it's kind of hard to say that everything will be taken away from them. I think that they'll be able to go out and throw the ball a little bit. We had a little bit of success, and I think that that's something that Coach Barnard and those guys, I don't think they're going to be afraid to throw the ball and throw it up. I think that they'll do what they've done all year long. But I think in the secondary, obviously, they'll see it on film. I think and it's not to say that their safeties aren't very good, but if you're going to pick who to go after, I think you're going to look at film and see that you probably don't want to go at number 8 or number 1 or 2 over on the other side. I think they can throw the ball a little bit, though.
Now, on the flip side, for Bixby defensively, for Stillwater defensively, they're trying to slow down Bixby's offense, which has been right there as one of the best in Oklahoma, regardless of class. First off, step one is to try to slow down the Presley brothers, which is nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Nearly impossible. Braylon has had just as much success as Brennan this year at the running back spot. But then their quarterback, Mason Williams, just a junior, he's played flawless football this year as well. So for Stillwater, it's almost kind of a similar question. How do you slow down, Bixby's offense and try to force Williams into uncharacteristic mistakes?
Yeah, well, Stillwater, they do a really good job defensively of creating turnovers. They switch the pitcher up for the quarterback, do a really good job of that as well. They're back and forth, sky and cloud, and I think that can, with a high school quarterback, that's tricky and that's tough on the run. If they can get pressure on him and they can do all that stuff in the back end, it could be a tough matchup for the Bixby guys. No one's really forced them to do that this year. But if you go back and watch the film from last year, I think Bixby was in a lot more Wildcat stuff than they probably wanted to be. I don't know if that's because of all the movement in the back end. But that might be something that's worth watching throughout the game to see how much Wildcat they get in. They don't do it as much this year as they did last year with the number 15 kid.
Yeah.
But I think Mason and Brennan and Braylon, those guys, and all the other receivers that are on that core can hurt you as well. They're all number 5 was a really good player. But like I said, it'll be tough. It'll be tough because those guys, I haven't seen in my 3 years in Oklahoma guys that can switch directions as quick as those two do.
Right.
The two brothers do. They made us look silly a couple times. We have pretty good athletes, and there was a couple times where I was not much you can do about that.
Right.
Those guys are just supreme athletes, and I think it'll be a matchup well worth watching when it's all said and done.
We saw these two play each other last year for a championship. They're getting the rematch for another championship. You were in a situation with Del City where you got another crack at Booker T. Washington, who you played in the playoffs a year ago. Does that give Stillwater any kind of advantage coming into the championship game, knowing that you saw them last year, they ended your season, you had to walk away with silver as opposed to gold? Is there any advantage to having seen them last year in the playoffs for either team?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's an advantage for both of them because I think they know what to expect. And you can obviously go back and look at that game on film and see what you did well, see what you didn't do as well. And on the other side of that, you can go see what happened against you and try to fix it, try to correct it. And, I think it also gives Stillwater some confidence knowing that they played with the champions. I mean, let's say it how it is. Those guys are the king of 6A too. And they played with them for a couple quarters, and I think that probably gives them a little confidence to look back and say, hey, we've got all these guys back, and we played them pretty well last year at times, and that's got to be confidence for them. And on the flip side of that, Bixby's got to be thinking the same thing. This is a team that we've played, we know what to expect, we know what they're going to bring to the table, because it's not much different. I mean, what Stillwater's doing, they do what they do, and they do it well. And Bixby's kind of the same way. I'll say this, Bixby was a little bit harder of a matchup as far as all the stuff that they do. That's what kind of shocked me about how you can get high school kids to do all those different things, the different formations, the different motions. Defensively, they're pretty still. They don't move a whole lot, but I can't say enough good things about those two coaching staffs. I think that's something that has to be talked about as well. Is they've got two of the best coaching staffs in the state, and I think that shines when you watch them on film.
So we talked a lot about the offense for both teams, and rightfully so. Both teams averaging north of 55 points a game, which seems insane. But on the flip side, defensively, both teams are two of the better scoring defenses as well. Yeah. Both teams giving up just about 10 to 14 points a game. Looking at it on paper, it seems like it's going to be a shootout. It seems like both offenses are going to be able to score. Do you expect a shootout?
No, not really. I really don't. I can see both teams moving the ball, but I think when it gets inside that red zone, I think you'll see two defenses that will bow their necks and stand tall and force field goals. Both of them got really good kickers, so I could see that coming into play with the final of the game. But I think it's going to be a little bit more of a defensive battle than what people think. Stillwater does such a good job of moving around and switching up the pitcher, and they get takeaways. I mean, that's one of the things that they do really well, and it's something that they really stress at the school. And Bixby's the same way. Bixby just they're strong, they're talented, they're put together well. Everywhere you look, you can't find a hole on their defense as well either. I mean, they just go play hard and they play their technique and. Just really solid. That's I think the weight room's going to come into play for both these guys as well. Because you look over at Stillwater's defense, and as far as the secondary goes, I don't know that you'll find a better looking secondary. And that's with on the other side, they've got those 2 Division I kids that are going to Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
But Stillwater's got a couple D1 kids in that back end as well. And you look at their safeties, and those guys could be college linebackers. I mean, they're all put together well. And so again, really no holes on that side of the ball either. I think the takeaways, whoever can protect the ball better, will be a big key to the win on this deal. And then whoever can get first downs and keep churning it out. Games like this, field position can be a big factor as well. And who knows Oklahoma weather in December? Who knows what that's going to look like in a week? But the kicking game I think will come into play, and both of those teams are pretty solid both in those areas as well.
All right, we'll get out of here on this. I'm not going to ask for a pick because you might have to worry about both teams next year, so no unneeded motivation for them. But I will ask this. When you see this game, when you see these two teams and you saw them firsthand this year, what's going to be the biggest edge for whoever ends up coming out on top?
Yeah, well, it's funny. On the way up here, I was talking to our district athletic director, Andy Collier, and he was asking me, what do you think? Who do you think's going to win? And I just told him if I was a gambling man, I would put it on even money. I mean, I think there's not really a favorite in this game. I think it's, if anything, you could maybe give Bixby a point just because of all the championships that they have, and that plays a factor sometimes. So, I think the biggest key is going to be whoever can ride the waves. This is the kind of game where there's so many playmakers. You could maybe stop. You could have 30 plays in a row of less than 2 yards a game, and then all of a sudden one of the Presley kids take it 70 on you, lightning fast, And so I think it's going to be able to be who can ride the flows, the ebbs, the ups and downs, who can really handle the adversity better. Both these teams are teams that haven't really been challenged this year,
right?
And so they're both coming into a game, and they're both going to be challenged. And who's gonna stand tall? Who's gonna bow their neck? Who's gonna handle that better? And I always think takeaways, turnovers. Who's going to win the turnover battle? I think that'll be a big key in this game because I think those two defenses are good enough to where against two good offenses, I'm a defensive guy, so I think even against two good offenses, I think there's going to be some takeaways here and there, and whoever can handle that the best, I think will probably come out and win the game.
I think what he just said is perfect representation of how this matchup's going to play out. Whoever handles the adversity the best, because both teams – they haven't had to play 48 minutes yet, 48 full minutes, from start to finish. They're going to have to for a gold ball. So whoever handles that, absolutely going to come out on top for a 6A2 championship. Coach, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. Hopefully this time next year we're talking about Del City playing for a gold ball instead of talking about the championship game. For Coach Dunn, I'm Michael Knight. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at some of those players to watch. We mentioned some of them already, Gunnar Gundy for Stillwater, Brendan Presley for Bixby. We're going to break them down a little bit more coming up next year with our 6A2 championship preview. All right, my thanks to all three coaches for spending some time with me during the off week as they prepare for this week's state championship game. Bixby head coach Loren Montgomery, Stillwater head coach Tucker Barnard, and then, of course, Del City head coach Mike Dunn. And, it's an interesting situation whenever you ask a coach who's played both teams and lost to both teams, hey, do you mind sitting down with me and talking about the matchup? Some guys, they might be a little salty about it, but I definitely want to credit Coach Dunn at Del City for his hospitality. And he was excited. He was fired up to talk about that game. And you saw it in the interview. I mean, he's just a fan of high school football in Oklahoma, so it was really cool to sit down with him and talk about this matchup and break it down and give a little different perspective on this matchup featuring two very good football teams. So my thanks especially to him for his hospitality in Del City. And then, of course, both coaches as they prepare for the biggest game of the year. All right, it's time to take a look at two players to watch for both teams. And we mentioned the star power on both sides, and both teams, they absolutely have them. And we're going to start with the Pioneers and their quarterback, Gunnar Gundy. Without a doubt, a player to watch, and it's easy to see why this season. And I mentioned how flawless he has been as a quarterback that's been able to protect the ball. And we mentioned it in our conversation with Coach Barnard as far as, what has been the biggest key to him taking that next step. He's always been a really good quarterback the last couple of years. You could see that, he has the talent there. He has the ability to be one of the better quarterbacks. But now he's just putting it all together, and it's been fun to watch throughout the season. However, when you take a look at what he did in the championship game against Bixby last year, you have to be at least a little concerned if history repeats itself. I mean, these were his numbers in the title game a year ago, and of course, weather had a lot to do with that. If you remember those championship games, there was a lot of rain, there was lightning, there were delays. So weather certainly had something to do with it. But he finished the game 8 of 19 for 70 yards and an interception in the title game against Bixby. He had 11 incompletions in the championship game a year ago. He's had 13 incompletions in the playoffs this year total. So that's in the last 2 games and blowout victories over Sapulpa and another blowout victory over Choctaw. He's had 13 incompletions total, just 2 more than what he threw in the championship game a year ago. We mentioned how nearly perfect he's been in that storyline that we mentioned right off the top. That matchup between him and the Bixby defensive backs, certainly going to be one to watch. Another player to watch for the Pioneers is a guy who's been making an impact since he was a freshman, running back Quantrell Walker. He's not the biggest running back, and that might end up holding him back as far as his full potential as a recruit when it comes to recruiting. And could he play at the Division I level? At what part of the Division I level? Is he a Power 5 guy? Is he a Group of 5 guy? How far could he end up being as far as recruiting goes? But when it comes to his play on the field, it doesn't matter what his size is. He just knows how to find the end zone. He's put up monster numbers again this year. And when you go back to those championship games, and while Gundy may have struggled in the title game, Quantrell Walker had a good game. He carried the ball 30 times for over 160 yards and a pair of touchdowns against Bixby. So Walker has the ability to really tear through this Bixby defense. He had success against them last year, and if he's able to have success again this year, pair that with Gundy being able to turn things around against this Bixby defense and have a better showing than he had a year ago in Stillwater, that offense, it's not going to miss a beat. For the Bixby Spartans, when you look at players to watch, you have to start with the guy who we've already talked about, OSU commit Brennan Presley. He's making the argument that he's the best overall player in the state of Oklahoma. When you talk about a full impact player, offense, defense, special teams, he does everything for the Spartans, and he does it exceptionally well. He's one of the top receivers in the state of Oklahoma statistically. Defensively, he's a shutdown corner. He has plenty of interceptions throughout the season. And if you're foolish enough to kick the ball to him, he has an ability to have an impact in special teams. And honestly, when I look at this matchup and I look at all of the different players, I think that Bixby has the best overall player in Brennan Presley. And whenever you have the best overall player on the football field on any given night, on any given play, you like your chances. So Presley, if he's able to have a big night again in his final go-around, he's had a wonderful career at Bixby, but now as a senior, this is his last go-around in his final game, looking to add another championship ring to his hand and another gold ball to the trophy case there at Bixby, and really, finish off what has been a fantastic high school career. Presley certainly wants to have an impact in Friday night's game. And a guy who's going to be throwing him the ball is their quarterback, Mason Williams, who just a junior. He still has one more year to grow and develop. Last year as a sophomore, he had a bit of a slow start, and there was a little bit of a learning curve there. But this season, all the talk that we mentioned how great Gunnar Gundy has been for Stillwater, and how flawless he has played and near perfection and nearly perfect with his throwing. The same can be said about Williams at Bixby. Mason Williams has had a phenomenal season. Obviously, when you have guys like Brennan Presley to throw the ball to, it makes things a little bit easier. But he's just one of the guys. I mean, he's just one of the guys who's had an impact in the receiving game. Mason Williams has been able to distribute the ball extremely well. And you talk about, not making mistakes with the football, very high completion percentage rate. He doesn't turn the ball over. He's taken just a massive step from last year as a sophomore to this year as a junior. And if he takes that next step again next year as a senior, he has the chance to be the best quarterback in the state. And that's going to be something to watch without a doubt for the Bixby Spartans. All right, let's take a look at 2 X factors before we wrap things up here on the 6A2 championship preview. For Stillwater, we're going to go to the defensive side of the ball and a guy who has to have plenty of momentum coming into this game. And we just talked about Mason Williams, the Bixby quarterback, and how successful he's been, how he's been able to take care of the ball. We mentioned the turnover battle earlier as a storyline to follow. A guy who's been able to make plenty of turnovers for Stillwater. I'm going with Kobe Hawley as the X factor for the Pioneers. If Stillwater is able to win this game, if they have an X factor show up, I'm picking Kobe Hawley. He has 7 interceptions on the season, and he's coming off a semifinal game against Choctaw where he had 1, 2, 3 interceptions in the victory for the Pioneers to punch their ticket to the state championship game. The turnover battle is going to be so critical. Both quarterbacks need to take care of the football, avoid interceptions, avoid turnovers. For the Pioneers, I think that Hawley has the chance to be that X factor. If he can come up with an interception or 2 and give that Stillwater offense a second opportunity, a third opportunity, 2 or 3 more possessions than they would have had, alternatively, I think that the Pioneers could have a chance to pull off the victory here. And then for Bixby, I'm going with Reese Vernon, their star kicker, All-American kicker, who certainly doesn't get enough credit. And look, because Bixby's scoring touchdowns all the time. They're not punting. They're not, electing to kick field goals a whole lot. But in a game where these two teams are so evenly matched, we talk about the turnover battle being so big. Another big key to it is field position. And if Stillwater is able to hold Bixby to a punting situation, Reese Vernon has the chance to completely change the field position for Bixby positively if they have to punt. And we're not saying that they're going to have to punt very often because so far this year they haven't had to. But Reese Vernon certainly is a weapon in the kicking game for the Spartans as they go into this championship game. He's going to be my X factor for Bixby as a guy who certainly hasn't gotten enough credit this season. But he's extremely talented, one of the best kickers in Oklahoma. All right, finally, we got to make a pick before we wrap things up here in our 6A2 championship preview. And when it comes down to it, we've talked all evening long about how evenly matched both teams are. Bixby, offensively, outstanding. The balance is there. The same is there for Stillwater. They have that 3-headed monster on offense with Gundy, Walker, and Bland. They have some other weapons on offense as well. They have a defense that is getting better and better and more confident as the weeks go on. But when it comes down to making a pick, this is the toughest one because these two teams are so evenly matched. But when it comes down to it, we got to lean towards the champs. They've been here before. They know what it takes to win. We expect an incredibly close game, a game that could end up coming down to the wire, could come down to a field goal situation at the end. Reese Vernon, I mentioned him as an X factor for Bixby. But when it comes down to the final prediction, we're going Bixby 38, Stillwater 35. We think there's going to be points. We think there's going to be scoring. There might be a turnover here or there, but in the end, we're going with the champs to continue this dynasty run in what could end up being the game of the year. All right, that does it for the 6A2 playoff, our championship preview. My thanks again to all the coaches who joined us. My thanks again to everybody, whether you're listening or watching us. We appreciate that. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast network. Just search OKPreps on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/OKPreps. And as always, follow us on Twitter at OKPrepsTV. Like us on Facebook. And as always, check us out on OKPreps.com as we continue to drop more championship preview coverage leading up to kickoff on Friday and Saturday in Edmond. And we'll have plenty of championship coverage on those days on the website and in social media. One final time, I'm Michael Dunn. This has been the 6A2 Championship Preview on OKPreps.